Mike,
Well,
why don't you
live
start
here,
this one off?
folks. What's up? Yeah, welcome to Rolland Market Mashup. Hope everyone had a great Thanksgiving. We are here, all of us live from Scottsdale, Arizona, and it is Monday morning, November 30th, and it seems like to start off, Moderna is hitting the ground running up huge pre-market, even though I don't really, I guess because the FDA is going to be okaying their emergency FDA approval today on the vaccine. That seems to be what's headlining the market to get the day rocking and the week rocking. And we've got a couple other market movers this morning. Slack is basically just got downgraded to equal weight from overweight by Barclays. I guess there's limited upside from that acquisition from Salesforce. I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts on that. I'm glad I didn't jump on that news last week, but I didn't really see that one coming personally. United Airlines are up pre-market. They got upgraded by Raymond James to outperform, which is interesting because they're taking a different approach than their peers in the space, according to Raymond James, which could lead to a faster economic recovery. And Apple's up a little, but I'm not sure if that's going to hold or not. We'll see. They got an upgrade to a buy from Loop Capital. GE is up slightly, and Palantir is up nice. Dan, I know you're in them at the moment. They were up over 50% last week since they IPO'd, I think a bit before that, but some interesting market movers this morning. And it seems like Bitcoin also quickly popped back after that dip a couple days back down to 16.3. It's north now of, it's getting close to 19,000 again. So we'll see if this week it's able to touch and eclipse 20,000. So what do you guys, for starters, think about this Moderna news? Like, why is it up so much?
Well, wait, Mike, what's the ticker in Moderna again?
mRNA.
mRNA.
Yeah. It's, this stock was in the 80s, I think, early last week. And the halftime show was talking about it on CNBC. And they thought the stock was way undervalued based on what was coming. And I just think there were a lot of people that were not buying into them being with the big players like Pfizer. And they're obviously right there with everybody else. So they're scrambling. And this stock is more of a pure play on the vaccine than a Pfizer, for example, because it's a bigger part of their total picture. Now, whether they make money on it at the end of the day, who knows? But I think that's kind of what's going on, that it's a pure play. And there were a lot of people that sold this stock when the CEO was doing insider selling, kind of every time he went on CNBC and said something positive.
Yeah.
Well, people were kind of negative on what was going on there, but they seem to be the real deal.
And what do you guys think? Like, I know we talked to a buddy of yours that's a scientist a couple days ago on speaker who was highlighting he doesn't think we're going to be back to normal until really Q4 of 2021 here. And, what we're starting to see is really July 4th seems to be the earliest when you really break down the distribution of this vaccine, enough people getting it. I kind of wonder what your guys' thoughts are on that, because I think initially when people heard the vaccine was coming out in December, there was this euphoria around, oh, we're getting back to normal here early in the year, which is not the case. So how do you guys think that's going to reflect the stay-at-home stocks, just the narrative around what we've been seeing the last 8 months when we're really only halfway through this thing, when you really think about it?
I think one of the interesting data points that came out over the weekend, and it's not a shock to anybody, but if you compare the Black Friday holiday season to last year's Black Friday holiday season, you had in-store sales drop 52% year over year, and e-commerce sales increased by, I think it was around 30% year over year, which is pretty significant for e-commerce when you think about how high it's already. So, I think you're going to naturally see the big e-commerce websites trade into the new year, like the Etsy's, the Shopify's, the Amazons of the world. And I wonder if some of these retail recovery stocks that have been acting a lot better in the last month and a half are going to kind of come back to reality a little bit, like the Macy's of the world and the Dick's Sporting Goods of the world. I'm not necessarily saying Dick's Sporting Goods, but just that category. I think you might see things kind of go back to where they were with that. I also saw that Morgan Stanley downgraded the banks today. So that'll be interesting to watch. JP Morgan, Bank of America, Goldman Sachs.
Yeah, so that is going to be interesting to watch, because I read a piece this weekend on banks, and it almost seems like with what's going on here, there could be some great value plays here to jump on the next couple of weeks in banks heading into 2021. So I'm wondering how that's going to play out. I'm starting to get tempted to get aggressive with some bank positions actually here at the end of the year.
But yeah, look, like Shopify's, they reported that their Black Friday sales increased 75% year over year to $2.4 billion. And that's a company that, is already showing basically triple digit year over year growth. It's phenomenal. No, Dad, you got to put this on mute or else you're going to on mute.
Got it.
Yeah, okay. I think that's a great position you're taking with that, Dan, because it's one of those things. It was obvious going into Black Friday, this was going to happen with everyone locked down. And I completely agree with you where you're going to see wind being let out of the sails of the Macy's of the world, because let's be real here. When push comes to shove going into this pandemic, they were in trouble. Nothing's changing now except more people are going online. And I don't necessarily think that's a good thing for them at all, when you have a lot of their former dollars being spent elsewhere. When you really think about it, whether you want to talk about a Etsy or a Shopify or, anything else people are thinking about getting into with e-commerce, where they might not even be going in that mode where they're locked down and like, oh, we're going to buy something else. I'm a huge fan heading into the end of the year of Etsy. I know you guys know I've been big on them. I haven't even owned it. I've just been talking about it, but I'm considering buying some call options in the money here for a couple weeks out, because I find it hard to believe they haven't had killer numbers. I'm sure we'll be hearing their next earnings are a blowout. And on the other end of that, though, with the banks, even with getting downgrades, you have to ask yourself, I think early in the pandemic, there was that whole risk of the credits and the defaults, and the way things have been structured now, even with the Fed and the interest rates. I almost think this is going to set up for a Wells Fargo type of run. And I know that we can choose a few names there. I haven't even owned banks at all. I hate banks, but after what I saw this weekend, I'm starting to think maybe it's time to look into them here before the end of the year.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it a little bit last week, but the downside of the banks are the Democrats in power like to regulate more than the Republicans, and it'll cost the banks more to deal with all that, no matter what. But the upside is that eventually they can raise dividends again because they've been in a freeze, and they can do buybacks again for the same reason. And some of their money that they've set aside for bad loans will probably come back to their balance sheet as a positive, because this thing wasn't as bad as anticipated. And the one thing that we're not talking about is the another deal in Congress and how big that'll be. We talked about it at length a month ago, and as time goes on and that doesn't happen, there's less money out in the system to be online buying stuff like Etsy. And I think a lot of the movement and some of those names was based on people having extra money in their pocket. And, I'm not so sure people are going to be out there spending as heavy now, because they're definitely hurting compared to where they were even like 3 months ago.
So
Yeah,
when do you see this next deal getting passed?
Well, it may not. That's the thing. It may be much smaller. It may be too late. There's things that start happening to both businesses and individuals that can be a real problem. You don't pay your rent and you get thrown out. I mean, all kinds of things that were kind of forgiven 3, 4, 5 months ago may not be happening now.
It's true. It's kind of interesting also to see the split right now between e-commerce websites this morning. And I don't know if it's going to change, but like Baba is selling off pretty good. So is JD. I don't know if that's just because they're Chinese stocks, but even Etsy basically flat, but down a little. Obviously, Shopify is the one that's getting the look this morning. Amazon up a little bit. I'm curious to see if this whole group gets a look. I'm kind of also looking at just all the stocks that are currently at their all-time high levels and just what they're going to do from here. There's a bunch of stocks that last week and even the week before hit new all-time highs and kind of continue to just go up every day. Square being one of them at 212.75 this morning. Fiverr being one of them. It's over 200 now. It's at 208. Obviously, CMPS, which you guys should talk about a little bit because it's been such a big move for them. Dad, you want to talk about that upgrade? I know it was almost a month ago, but just how significant it was compared to what they normally report.
Yeah,
obviously, Tesla over 600 this morning. So
yeah, I mean, with Compass, we talked about it about a month ago, where they got a buy recommendation from a research firm that normally does shorts only, and they came out with a buy on Compass, which is CMPS, and the stock at the time was, I believe, in the mid 30s, and the price target is 100. And they say it should immediately go there, which is language you never hear in a research report. So you got to kind of take it with a grain of salt. But the fact that they're a short house, meaning that they normally come out with negative research, their big thing is to look at a stock and say things worth zero and come out with a research report and play it that way. So this is highly unusual. It's a Peter Thiel company. They have one molecule that they're trying to turn into a depression drug. And if everything goes right, it'll be a home run. But obviously with these biotech, it's a long road, and they could be zero as easily as 200. So high caution. My thinking is
high caution, but get in it. It's one of those things, like I'm with you on that, Dad, but it's one of those situations, and you guys know I've been huge on this for months, this space, along with MMEDF, and I have this other one, ENTBF, which is the symbol for this company is focused on DMT as their primary foundation with mental health. You're going to see the shroom boom being talked about. Whether you want to call this screwed up or not, the narrative on Wall Street is going to revolve around addiction and mental health. That's going to be the next sexy thing going into this next year. There's no doubt about it. I think what I like even more about it is when Dan and I were talking a bit about this yesterday, cannabis stocks almost serve as this blanket. And I look at these psychedelic stocks as the dark horses, where you're going to see a lot of money flooding cannabis. Joe Biden in office, federally legalization, most likely coming with marijuana. I think the true winners here, though, are these psychedelic plays. And there's going to be a lot of duds, but if you pick the correct ones, just get a little entry in now. Don't go crazy, but just so you can monitor the stock and feel good about not being on the sidelines when these things run up hundreds of %. Even MMEDF, Dan, having a nice pre-market start today.
Yeah, and just to kind of talk about the differences here. So for our viewers, and guys, correct me if I'm wrong, because you guys have done the homework more than me, but CMPS is going about this in the federal approved drug department route, where they're basically trying to get an FDA approved drug for depression that revolves around psychedelics with mushrooms. and MMEDF is trying to go about it at the recreational level. So obviously, ever since Oregon passed the laws that decriminalize and basically legalize drugs, that stock's been getting a nice look, because if that continues to happen, it's going to, like Mike said, kind of be the dark horse. Everyone talks about the weed space, but if mushrooms also get legalized, no one's talking about that. And then, oh, really? And then CMPS is the more interesting one, I think, just because of the FDA approval. But yeah, both those stocks have been great to watch, no doubt about it. Damn.
Well, I think with MMEDF, something to keep in mind, we know Kevin O'Leary is a promoter. Dad, you love talking about that with him. They're starting to remind me a little of DraftKings with the headlines, where if you look last week, there was news came out Tuesday about they're launching Albert, which is a digital medicine vision for psychedelic medicine. And then they announced bringing in $25 million for a public offering on Wednesday. I just could see this being one of those situations where we start seeing some news coming out on some PR about things that people might get overzealous about. And, it's just something to monitor, because we're in the infancy stages of this. When you look at how cheap it is to produce a microdose of mushrooms, it's literally a joke. We're talking about cents on the dollar here. This thing, the margins are unbelievable in this space. They really are. So, I'm a huge bull on it.
What's going to be interesting to watch here is Zoom has their earnings today after the close. And obviously we've talked about Zoom a lot on this show. And, Dad's called them one of the most potentially overvalued stocks that you could see retrace to pre-pandemic levels and be like a major short for a lot of hedge funds. You might see that move happen.
Take us through the other end of that.
What?
Take us through the other side of that, the narrative of it could go up more.
I'm having a tough time wrapping my head around that narrative. I think the narrative that causes it to go up more is people who right now are doubting their abilities to hold on to corporate partnerships realize that they're actually winning with that. And I don't know who is and who isn't. I think Microsoft Teams is very competitive with Zoom, and no one really talks about them as a close second or even number one. But to me, if Zoom comes out and shows the world that they're picking up more corporate clients and they're going to be the leader in the space, then that'll be great for them. But if they show that they're losing that stuff at all, that's where I think you could see their stock. Like if they come out with any sort of news that shows that they're losing some of their business to a competitor, I think the stock trades under 400 after hours.
Well, let's think about this for a second, because we know what we just highlighted early in this show, this lockdown / obviously not saying the lockdown is going to be ongoing, but the work from home culture is going to be around a lot of 2021. And all I keep hearing is Zoom's run up way too much. And I ask myself, I get Microsoft is a legit threat in that space. That's always, for some reason, a dark horse with certain things, just like them owning LinkedIn that's never talked about. But what other competition threats are actual next level for Zoom?
What was the last thing you said, Mike?
What other companies besides Microsoft would you consider as a legit threat for market share for Zoom, where we're going to start being like, oh man, they're in trouble here? Like, who are we talking about here?
I mean,
Microsoft is one of them for sure.
Microsoft's the main one, but like you could even look at companies like Snapchat as kind of in that space and taking away from the face-to-face video platform that Zoom provides people. Like that's where I look at Zoom, is they need to solidify themselves as the corporate powerhouse with that. And they've done a good job with the colleges. I know they're the main company that all the colleges are using. You know, we talked to Marty the other night at dinner. That's what he uses when he's teaching college classes.
Yeah.
So that's big for them. But I don't necessarily know if corporate America is using Zoom like people think. You know, you got Google Hangouts, you got Microsoft Teams, there's other options. And
I hate Zoom. You guys know I don't like them at all.
Yeah.
So
Plus, you never know that, Apple may come out with something. I mean, there's all types of competition that's out there waiting to happen. I mean, the
And talking
fact that
about Snapchat,
FaceTime,
kudos to you, Dan, for getting me on that train. I've been up nice on them the first 2 weeks in that stock. Even here in this weekend, we were with family friends, 12-year-old son on Snapchat. Like, he was glued to it. I saw him on Snapchat. He couldn't even pay attention to us. So when you really think about it, when you think of
And
movers and shakers in social media, Dan, I know you've been big on Pinterest too. I'm hearing too much usability next level with loyalty with these two platforms. I'm going to be getting way more aggressive here. When I've been trying to figure out my next big aggressive in the money put plays, Snap and Pinterest, the writing's on the wall with where they're both heading. I was not that big of a believer in Snap's advertising up until recently. Now I'm actually seeing firsthand the value there. What are you guys having connection issues?
Look, the big thing with them is they've both run up over 100% this year alone. But
For good
if you
reason,
look at
though.
What'd you say?
For good reason.
Yeah.
It's merited. That I don't think that has anything to do with the lockdown. I think that's just a maturing platform that's getting way more people flocking. And we know what that means. Like, look at the early Facebook days.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think it's pretty amazing that Pinterest is over 70 this morning. Good for them.
It's going to 75.
Yeah, and another stock to keep an eye on is going to be AMD. Obviously, Nvidia is the big one in that space, but AMD has slowly gotten back to all-time highs, and I think you're going to hear a lot of positive news from all these game console makers about their holiday sales, whether it's Xbox or PlayStation or the games itself. And when you look at who's making the chips in these games, AMD is really crushing that space. And it wouldn't shock me if you see that stock over 100 before the end of the year. And then, it puts it in that level of bringing in those traders who are going to play it on the 100 break. So there's a lot of.
Yeah, I know we brought up Zillow. Sorry, I keep not sure if this thing is like stopping when you guys talk with the connection.
No, I think the connection's been good. Yeah, Zillow's been treading water. It almost needs a major upgrade for the volume to come in.
That's what I wanted to talk to you about, Dan and Dad. I think I was reading something on Zillow this weekend, indirectly, but about when you're seeing a shift naturally of a lot more people running for the hills away from cities and buying houses that we're renting, finding cheap places. They don't have to be in the cities right now. How does that not help Zillow? Like, when I see this, all I think of is, well, people are going to their platform, their advertising is going to go through the roof, and then they're using their platform for transactional purposes. Dan, you were even saying you're on Zillow all the time just looking at what ifs. Oh, that would be cool to buy there. And I've talked to so many people that do that. It's like a wish list of, oh, I want to live there. I just think these guys they've been a holding pattern. We know how the stock acts. There's holding patterns. It pulled back a bit, and then it goes to all-time highs. I'm long Zillow. I'm thinking about getting longer way more here because I'm seeing this being ready for a new breakout, personally.
Yeah, look, I mean, first off, I think it's important to acknowledge that it is above 100. Like, when you look at the run the stock has gone on this year, it's not like it hasn't been doing well with the rest of the market.
It was at 18 in March. Let's not forget that.
It seems like whenever it has earnings and then gets that big lift off, it always kind of comes back to reality and never really breaks through the levels. But, I continue to think about Gene Munster's comments, and I never even looked at investing this way, but it kind of changed the way I look at things. And he was kind of looking at it, and it was the same reason that he no longer likes Netflix. And he was like, look, when you look at an industry and when you look at how much room it has to adapt to this new digital era, there's several companies that still come to mind that haven't really made that transition. And that's where he was talking about Zillow as one that hasn't, and Netflix is one that has. So he was kind of looking at Netflix, and I know I brought this up before, but his whole thing was Netflix is a great company, and they're always going to be a great company, and they're great for consumers. But what they have done to change the way consumers consume content basically put Blockbuster out of business and make the new thing Netflix. It's already done already. It happened. They digitalized that world. And that's where I think there might be a day where you could buy a house or rent a house without the middleman. And we're still far from that. But it doesn't, like, in my mind, that day is coming. And when that day comes, a company like Zillow, you would think, is going to be so much bigger than where they're at right now, because they need that day to come. Until that day comes, it's a lot of fluff, but that day will come. Like, I'm on Zillow all day long, but how are they making money?
But there's no fluff in their advertising. When you look at how many people are on there.
Yeah, but I think there's a lot to what we're talking about here, but it's also something that there could be another player that shows up out of nowhere and dominates this thing and takes over for what Zillow's trying to do.
Let's not pretend. Let's not play that game here. There's no one coming in.
That's true, though.
No, but Dad's right in the sense that until you feel confident basically buying a house or a condo with a couple clicks of a button, there's still a lot of room for somebody to really make you feel confident doing that.
Well, if you look at what they're doing behind closed doors, Zillow, with the technology here, I don't think there is someone that can just get a million people on their platform.
I think it could potentially be a slow mover over the years until the industry. I
don't think so at all. I think when the power of having viewer eyeballs that are looking at purchasing or renting homes on a platform at that level, it's very challenging to get all those people off of that notion. The trust factor that's instilled in that alone is so hard to even put into words and quantify. I don't see how there's anyone. I mean, Redfin's the other one in that space we've talked about. I don't think there's going to be a legit actual threat to those guys at all. I really don't. I don't see there being a capability of a slow mover. This isn't a tortoise type of sector. Like, this is something that they have a stranglehold on the future of how real estate works because of their two-headed approach. They have advertising and house flipping. When you have that many people, you're allowed to just crank up ad dollars. And that's why I wanted to bring up Roku to you guys. With where connected TV is heading away from cable, I think Roku is going to be having way more room to run, even though it's run up a lot. When you look at what people are doing with decision-making here and where marketing dollars are flooding to with television, Roku's starting to become a major winner. So that's something to think about in that same narrative when you think about the advertising.
Yeah, well, we'll see what happens. But I mean, there will be competitors. For now, they seem to be on their own. But you still can buy a house through Zillow, or at least I'm not seeing anyone who bought a house and Zillow was the broker.
That's though what makes me excited about Zillow. But yeah, I mean, the time will be interesting to tell. Let's get a quick look at the futures here, guys. Because last night they kind of opened up in the green and quickly just flushed down. So you got the Dow that looks like it's going to open down 134 points, which is about 0.5%. S&P down 8.5 points, which is 0.23%, and tech up 14 points, which is 0.12%. So mixed bag of hammers, but leaning towards the sell side for sure, no doubt about it, except the NASDAQ. So that'll be interesting. And Dad, I mean, last day of the month, are there things we can kind of be looking out for because of that?
Yeah, I think that there'll be people that are saying, let's lock some of these profits in for the year. They're thinking, okay, now we're in December. And there'll be others that say, shit, I'm not in this market hard enough. I got to add to my positions. So you got a tug of war going on right now. I think weak stocks will get weaker over the next few weeks, and strong stocks are going to get much stronger. And I look to the big names to really have a good end to the year. If you look at charts like Apple and Microsoft, they look like they could break out in any direction. I'd be surprised if it's to the downside. And it wouldn't surprise me to see Apple at an all-time high the last week of December.
Everyone is going nuts for Mark. They loved him.
Yeah, I know. Mark Roberts is on
that show, Mike.
The Canadian show for the last 20 minutes.
He just finished, and everyone in the comments is going crazy about him. So DraftKings is also on the mover again today, which we got to talk about this stock because we talk about them all the time, and they were a dud for the last few months, and finally they're back in action. 53.72 this morning. Back to headlines that aren't actual headlines. This morning they announced a partnership with the Pistons. Yeah, we've seen this dance before, but when DraftKings is getting the look, you don't step in front of it. You join the party. Like, this stock might be back in the 60s here before you even look again. So all eyes on DraftKings, and that ends our show, guys. Rolling market mashup. Good job, Mike. Mike, you even there? All right. Well, I'll log on, and I'm gonna log on and end the show. I don't know what.
Why always still show on?
Because it is still on. I don't know.